Welcome everyone to today's event, Work Differently, but not like that. I hope you all will enjoy today's content. We've got a few ground rules that we'll go over for today, so bear with us if we go through that housekeeping, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes. So if anyone is not able to view today's content either live or via the recording, we will post a screen reader accessible PDF of the deck on our LinkedIn after today's presentation, embedded with that alt text. So let's jump in. Again, work differently, but not like that. In today's conversation, our intent is to highlight how unintentionally rigid expectations, communication styles, and accommodations practices could be holding teams back. Through the experiences of today's speakers, we'll hear about how different work styles empower neurodivergent employees and how embracing difference and flexibility actually positively impacts all employees, regardless of neurodivergence. We hope that you'll take your pre-existing interest, layer on insights from today's session, and go back to your teams with an opportunity to shift corporate mindset, not just to accommodate differences, but to embrace and cultivate it. And we know it's worth it for your companies too. When the working environment invests in embracing the nuanced inputs of all variations of diverse brains, it yields abundance in increased employee engagement, compounded innovation, higher productivity, and amplified business metrics. So glad you're here to join us. A little housekeeping for us. While we totally love questions and engagement from the audience, the planning committee has designed this session a little bit different. So different than a standard panel. And for that reason, we ask that all of your questions be added to your chat. So you should see on the right-hand side of your own screen, there's a little chat button there. So feel free to start chats with each other, engage with each other all throughout. Let us know what's resonating with you, what's not, your own experiences. We love all of those engagements. Give us emojis if that's possible. I'm all about it. And then if we're able to kind of organically address some of those within the discussions, we will. Our moderators will take a look at that. If not, you're obviously welcome to reach out on LinkedIn to any of our speakers directly. We'd be happy to continue the conversation there. That lets us get through all the content authentically. But again, let us know how it's working all throughout in that chat section. We love the engagement and just want to make sure you get what you came for. So let's start that interaction. Go ahead and pop into the chat. Where are you coming in from? Are you dialing in or videoing in? Tell us, where are you coming from? I'm personally here in the Chicagoland area. How about you all? So as we look at our next slide, we're going to go into our introductions. Excellent. So I'd first like to start off to especially introduce our content expert today, Rebecca Warnken. Rebecca is a senior vice president with Aon's health transformation team. In this role, she works with employers to develop benefit strategies and solutions to attract and retain talent, address diverse workforce needs, and improve population health and well-being. Rebecca is a subject matter expert, SME, in the areas of health equity, inclusive benefits, and neurodiversity. Rebecca will be walking us through today's content, sharing expertise both professionally and personally, and we are very lucky to have her voice here today. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for the warm welcome. I'm just so honored to be here and speaking on this panel with this great group of folks here today. Just a little more about me. I actually, in addition to my day job, bring some personal lived experience to this topic. I identify as a neurodivergent woman of the autistic variety, and I have two very different but neurodivergent kiddos that I'm raising and actively involved in our Aon Empowering Abilities BRG, and in some local organizations. I'm based in the Philadelphia area. For accessibility today, we're also going to include a physical description of ourselves as we go through our introductions. So I am a white Caucasian woman. I have long light brown hair, I guess, on a good day, and a blue flowery shirt. And I go by she, her pronouns. Super excited to have three others that will be bringing their own perspectives to our conversation today. So Maxine, I will turn it over to you next to introduce yourself.
So good afternoon, everyone. Well, depending on what part of the country you're in, right? So hello, everyone. My name is Maxine Valle. I'm a data management manager. I've been in the insurance industry for over 30 years now. I self-identify as a neurodivergent woman. I have not been diagnosed. I'm undiagnosed. I have 3 children, one of whom was diagnosed as having ADHD. Although he does not self-identify, he doesn't recognize his neurodivergence at all. So that's who I am. And myself, I am, as I mentioned, I'm a Black woman. I have short purple hair. I'm wearing purple glasses. I go by the she, her pronouns, and I'm wearing a baby blue shirt.
Awesome, Maxine. I will jump in next. I am Jessica Hatton. On the consultant side, I also go by Eli, so you may have heard me in both areas. I am a Caucasian, femme-presenting person. I've got short brown curly hair. I wear glasses. I've got a green shirt and a plaid blazer on today. I have been with Aon for 2 years as the North American regulatory change manager. And before that, spent about a dozen years working for another financial services company leading their international regulatory. So today I'll be providing the perspective of a people leader who is a neurodiverse people leader and who led teams from a neurodiverse perspective. But of course, as you see on the screen, all of us bring quite a few intersectionalities to the mix today. How about you, Dennis?
Thank you, Jessica. My name is Dennis Wang. I'm Director of Enterprise Architecture at Aon, so I'm in IT. I'm a Chinese American man in my 50s. I'm wearing a purple shirt and I have a close cropped cut haircut. So my pronouns are he, him, and I am, although we're here to talk about how we work differently, right? We all come from different backgrounds, and we can't forget that, we do have families outside. So my perspective is that of a caregiver. I have ADHD. I have 3 sons, all of them in some way, shape, or form either have ADHD or my youngest is autistic. So and I manage people as well. So trying to understand where everybody's coming from, whether it's themselves personally or people that they're caring for. So
great.
Glad to be here.
You. Yeah, I'm so glad to have all 3 of you, and thank you for being willing to share your experiences with our audience. One more round of thank yous before we go any further. Want to thank very much to both our local and global sponsors. We couldn't dive in this session without you. Thank you to all the volunteers who have put in countless hours to make this programming come to life, especially the volunteers behind the scenes for this session. You are all amazing. The technology is just very seamless, and I couldn't do any of this by myself. So really appreciate all the work that went into our session today. And thank you so much, especially to our audience members. We know you're taking time out of your busy schedules and days to join us and engage in this conversation. And this is how we make change, right? We talk about it and we engage in conversation. So thank you for being here.
Let me pop in also and say, in the spirit of adaptability and accommodations, thanks for everybody who's noticing that the chat function isn't working right now and is moved over to Q&A for a moment. Our folks who are working hard behind the scenes are looking to flip that for us. But in the interim, thanks for being flexible. Great accommodations.
Yes, thank you. All right, one more, I think the last housekeeping before we get into Jessica's meat and potatoes here. So we do want to make sure there's opportunity for interaction from a number of different perspectives today. So in addition to the chat, once that's working, we're also using some polling via Slido. So you can scan the QR code on your smartphone, or you can go to slido.com and enter the code 4137225. And we'll have that in the chat as well, I think. And we'll also have the QR code repeating again on slides. So if you miss it now, you'll have another opportunity later. All righty. Yes, so let's go. So let's get going here. We actually, in prepping for this session, we had a lot of discussion about terminology. What does it even mean to talk about disability? So we really wanted to frame our conversation starting at the ground floor. And of course, anytime I'm preparing for a meeting, I go to my friend Google and I asked, what is disability? And one of the top search came up from the CDC, and I'm going to read this out loud because I really want us all to think about the words here as we talk about what is disability. And the CDC says disability is any condition of the body or mind, in quotes, impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and activity limitation and interaction with the world around them, in parentheses, participation restrictions. So we're going to walk through 3 different models of disability. So 3 different ways of how people may perceive this question, what is a disability? And would love to get everyone just thinking about what this means to you personally, and I will chat with our panelists in just a moment. So the first model is the medical lens model of disability. And this is essentially viewing disability from the perspective of the body or mind having a disorder or a deficit or an impairment that may require treatment or intervention or support from an expert or a specialist with the goal of alleviating symptoms or curing or treating or returning to a healthy state. So if you think about sort of how the insurance is constructed in countries like the US, it's really based around the idea of prevent, treat, cure, improve quality of life. So that's really thinking about that medical model. Next, we're going to move into a second model, and that's the social model of disability. And the reason I wanted to read those words is there's within the social model, it's sort of this lens that, a disability might just be one dimension of our identity. So we might also be, from a certain race or background or, have a certain eye color. We may also have a disability as part of our identity. And what makes something disabling is that interaction with our environment or the society around us. So sort of taking the perspective that it's not just about the individual, but it's that individual's experience with their world around them, their surroundings. So where can we make modifications and think about accessibility so that someone can navigate their day in a way that feels authentic. So that's the social model. The last one, and discussing with our group, I think this one was maybe the one that people had heard of the least, but maybe has been around the longest. And the third is the moral model of disability. And this is really kind of coming from the perspective that a disability is inherently good or bad, or there's a value attached to that. And I think your first reaction might be, well, I don't think of disability that way, but I think there are just inherently a lot of perspectives and attitudes kind of rolled up in that term disability that might have either bad or good connotations on the more negative side. So the feelings of shame or stigma for an individual or for family members. Think about how we portray disability in movies. If the bad guy, the villain, has a disability and that disability is sort of signifying that that person is bad or evil, that might fall under this moral model. Or on the flip side, positive connotations. So disability as a superpower or disability as a blessing, and how we talk about and how we in our societies kind of think about disability. So these are all 3 models. And I'm going to add one more definition to our conversation here. Yep, go ahead. And again, think about the words. I think there's some similarities in how the CDC and then this at the bottom comes from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. A little bit of a shift in the tone and the words being used. So persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So I like this because it does really speak to that interaction of the person with their surroundings and their challenges, interacting with their environment, but then also this concept of equity, that we're not all starting from the same place, but we're trying to get everyone the same opportunities to succeed. So with that, I'm going to actually ask our panelists. I'm thinking as we are talking through these topics, it might be evoking certain feelings or reactions. So, Jessica, what comes to mind when you hear the descriptions of these 3 models?
Yeah, it's a bit mixed for me. And I think that's an important thing to point out is that everybody identifies with these things differently, and they may interact with one another differently. And that may change. It has for me. It probably will continue for me. But as of today, it's a bit mixed, I think, between them, because on one hand, I'm grateful to be able to leverage the positive parts of being an autistic person, an autistic leader, and leverage parts of that in how I lead teams. What can get tricky, though, is when we're focusing just on making everything accommodating for those different thinking brains, but different people's disabilities do impact them differently. And those are very real things. And I think sometimes what I see, not just in the corporate mindset, but what I also see by very well-meaning individuals, peers that you work with, is that the thought is that social is the right way, right? You're supposed to, it's the anti prejudice way to look at things is through the social model. And that's not necessarily the case, right? Theoretically, it's the case, but we also don't want to negate that there are very real challenges for folks as well, and that may be different for each person, whether you see that or not. And so it's a little convoluted there. What I love is that in the corporate world, we're not having conversations about trying to convince people that whether it's, disabilities or other elements of diversity, that we need to care about those things. Like, we're not having those conversations anymore, right? Thankfully, that's a moment of the past. We're all on board, which is great, good. And a lot of companies are, putting their foot forward, I'd say more importantly, even their dollar forward to go towards that social model in the way that they're designing their structures, which is excellent. What I think what we're lacking today, though, is a lot of companies, often inadvertently, are lacking that infrastructure, the tools and resources to really systemically support that change. So, for example, are we training our managers about how to do this? Is the culture consistent from geographic location, from team to team, from tenure on team? I mean, I see kind of different people have different experiences, even within the same company or even the same location, sometimes depending on who they're with. And it's a lot of folks are like, well, I'm a great manager. I totally support it. If someone comes to me and says they want accommodations, I'm all about it. Well, but what if they don't come and say that, right? How can we be an inclusive and supportive environment without somebody having to come and disclose necessarily as well? So there's still a lot of pockets where we get inconsistency, or even corporate policies that are inconsistent, that we've got some areas to really beef up, where we can take that medical model, support it, and really integrate it into the social area from a corporate perspective or from a leader perspective. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Jessica. So Dennis, as a parent, what's your perspective on these different models?
So I'll start off with the medical model, right? Because again, as a parent, when my youngest son was diagnosed with autism, we didn't know much about the condition, so we wanted to learn as much as possible. And again, there are going to be pros and cons with each one of these models, right? The medical one, there are potentially interventions or accommodations that can help, right, with the quality of life. Absolutely, right? If we look at glasses, nearsightedness, that's a disability, right? Before they had corrective vision, you would be severely disabled to navigate the world, right? Mm-hmm. But now it's so common. It's an accepted medical accommodation, right? You can wear contacts, you wear glasses. It's not a problem. There's a lot of, we'll get to a bit of into the moral model here about, medications that modify your mood. Those are bad, right? So but the ADHD medication that I'm on really helps me function, and it can help your kids navigate already a challenging period, right? You have to be cautious though, because again, there were some autistic organizations that were trying to cure autism, and that can kind of get on a dark path, so to speak, right? Socially, it's not like we go outside and people are like, oh, look, you have a disabled child, we're going to celebrate you, type of thing, right? Oftentimes you go out and in social settings, you're worried about how his behavior, he doesn't flap so much, but when he gets excited, he just screams, and how difficult that can be. It can be embarrassing for the parents. You don't know how other people are looking at you or thinking about you. And socially, it's the hardest. Do you explain to people why he's done that, right? So there's not enough education, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this here. And the moral model, right? I think this is the trickiest one for me, because it kind of puts it ethicizes the disabilities. It's good or it's a bad, right? And once you start thinking about it that way, it's really easy to transition into, oh, well, am I to blame for this good or bad thing, right? My older sons have ADHD. I know they got it from me. Does that mean I'm at fault for that condition that they have to deal with now, right? Again, they all wear glasses because of me, so am I to blame, right? I know my wife, when we got the diagnosis, blamed herself. What could she have done differently in pregnancy? Maybe that would have prevented the autism. And so morally, it's hard to put a good or bad label to things, right? So again, pros and cons to each one of them. If we can look at them positively, that's fantastic. But oftentimes they come with a negative aspect to them that most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, I feel that, and just I think the complexity here, and even if we know about these three models and really kind of navigating fluidly between the three at different times. All right, we're going to kick off our first poll. So the QR code that I shared earlier, you can go ahead and respond to our first question, and that is, what model, and it can be more than one, of disability do you identify with? What resonates with you, or what do you feel has impacted you? And while folks give a minute to respond, I just want to call out something that was put in the chat, which I love. So to the question of what is a disability, perhaps it's a challenge to a capacity. And I like that because I think that's right. It's thinking about, like, what are those barriers to enabling someone to do or thrive or be successful, whether it's in the workplace or accessing healthcare or accessing education. So I thank you for that perspective. And it looks like, about 2/3 of you are resonating with that social model, a number medical, and there is no right or wrong answer, right? I think just hearing from both Jessica and Dennis, I think there was aspects of multiple models that have impacted each. So thank you so much for sharing. You can continue to respond. I think once we flip the slide, though, I think the poll will turn off. So thank you for responding, and we'll have more interaction to come. So let's go maybe up half a flight of stairs here. And the topic of our session, invisible disabilities, or also known as hidden disabilities. What are invisible disabilities? And essentially, an invisible disability could be any physical, mental, emotional disability that is largely unnoticed by the outside observer. And I think that is the really key point here, that for an invisible disability, not being able to see or perceive that from someone on the outside creates an extra layer of, I think, challenge and barrier. And there's, a long list, and this is not exhaustive of examples. I'm not going to read all of them, but it could be, autism or ADHD, which our panelists have been talking about. It could be a chronic condition that impacts someone's mental, physical, or emotional state. It could be a mental health condition. So there's lots of different conditions that can fall under this broad umbrella. I think it's important to note, too, that someone's disability can fluctuate throughout life. So anyone can become disabled at any time. I think that is a really unique part of what we're talking about today. And it's so highly dependent on our surroundings. So to Dennis's example about using glasses or contact lenses, if you are somewhere and you have low vision, where everything's being communicated by audio instructions and there really isn't anything visual to look at, it really might not feel like someone has a disability. Or you give them their glasses and there isn't necessarily that feeling of being disabled. It's really just a function of those tools, those accommodations, and your environment. So with that, we're all here today because of a personal connection to invisible disabilities. And so, maybe Dennis, I will start with you. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience navigating invisible disabilities?
Yeah, I think the one story I tell most people is that when my youngest son, when they see him, I've heard people say, well, he doesn't look autistic, right? And it's not his appearance, it's his behaviors, right? He's nonverbal still, he's 9 years old, and he doesn't respond to typical verbal cues the way neurotypical people do. My older sons, you can't tell that they have ADHD, but they, struggle to do the non-preferred tasks, right? They need stimulation in order to focus. and get things done. So you look at them and you can't tell, right? And so from that perspective, nobody knows that they've got the disability. The one son, again, I think like Maxine's son, doesn't want to admit that he's different, even though people can't see that he's different. So I'm like, well, maybe if you take the medication, it'll help you. Well, then people will know I've got this condition. I'm like, nobody's watching you take your medication, right? So that's where it a lot of times people don't know your mental state. I know one of the questions was, what considers a mental health conditions are considered a disability. And again, if it's creates any challenge to you to do what you need to do, then that's a disability. Whether it's formally recognized, I think is probably a better question. And are there accommodations for it, right? So, if you've got children that are in the school, you can get IEPs for them to help them through the process, because again, some of the expectations are going to be more neurotypical expectations because that's the majority of the students. The IEPs help level things off a little bit, right? And again, those are accommodations that we can get with them in school.
Thank you, Dennis. Jessica, what about you?
Oh, you're muted. Jessica, you're
on
muted.
Really thought I'd get through this whole thing.
Someone was going to do it, so it was you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Dennis, you really struck a chord with me as I'm thinking about my son, who's recently been diagnosed, but not recently autistic. As I say it recently, I'll say oh, he's was diagnosed in July, and people who are not as accustomed, I think, to interacting with autistic people or parents of autistic people, they're like, oh, and you're like, no, I've known him for 5 years. He didn't just become autistic. He just was diagnosed because, to your point, they don't look autistic. Or, especially when they're younger, it can kind of look like they're misbehaving or they're choosing to misbehave rather than they're dysregulated or they're misunderstanding. Or I know for my son, if you say one thing and it's not actually speaking to the cause of why he's doing something, then it's as if you had said something totally irrelevant, right? Like he had a situation where he was throwing books at school, but to him, he wasn't throwing books. He was just getting really excited to get a book. So they said, stop throwing books. And he was like, what a weird thing to say. That doesn't apply to me. So I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, right? As if you said, take your elephant costume off. And he's like, I don't have an elephant costume on. So it's just kind of interesting to think through the literals of that, but to kind of pivot that and think about it from the workforce perspective, invisible disabilities I'm so passionate about it. I want to acknowledge and give some space as this whole event is for very specific and recognized invisible disabilities. Although I know I've seen a couple people in the chat or the QA chat mention some, certain diagnoses, is this an invisible disability or is that an invisible disability? I mean, I guess you'd have to look at deciding, is it medical model or social model? And also, what is your own identity hold space for? Personally, I think a lot of people who do identify as someone with a disability, a lot of those people do hold space for self-identifying as someone with a disability, whether it's an official diagnosis or not. But I'll leave that up to you, those who are kind of wondering. But what I want to kind of point out in the working world especially is, and there was a question about this too, are year-end reviews skewed sometimes for neurodivergent folks? In my opinion, 100%, I think they are. I mean, I think about some of the reviews I've personally received, like Jessica has too much personality, and I think about action and, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Have fewer personality, have less turn down person, that's not actionable, or works too much outside of work. Okay. Different things that it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so what's hard about invisible disabilities, and from my perspective as an autistic person, but I'm sure for a lot of folks, is that you are still held accountable often for the masked version of yourself, the way in which you can perform as the non-impacted version of yourself. I often say I've got resting autistic face. I kind of just look and sound like this all the time. When I'm happy and sad and mad and angry and grumpy, it just kind of looks and sounds like this all the time. The actual words I'm using change, but I look like this. But that doesn't mean I feel like this. Inside, isn't like this. I'm still learning how to emote that thing outside. And that's very difficult. And I definitely get hooked on some of those things at work, or, Jessica said this, but it didn't seem like she was genuine. Well, that's really hard because I was genuine. And I literally said, if it sounds like I'm not being genuine, I am. I'm genuinely excited, right? But then that sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not. I'm genuinely excited, right? So that gets really tricky. But there's also plenty of invisible disabilities, whether it's temporary, people who are pregnant, people who have, birthed a child and are pumping breast milk, right? And you can think about holding space for those folks, right? We might say, oh, let's just work through this break time. We might have site, let's just work through the break time and get through the offsite quicker. Well, someone might be pumping breast milk and you might not know that. And then they either have to choose not to pump breast milk, which is incredibly uncomfortable process, or they have to literally miss that part of the offsite, literally not have a seat at the table where their voice isn't heard. So it's really important to think through, just assume that someone or someone's in the room always has an invisible disability, and think through just naturally making those accommodations all the time without someone having to ask for them. And then one step further too, and then I want to hand it over to Maxine because I know she's got great personal experience here too. One other thing I want to say is whether you have a diagnosis or not, whether you should have a diagnosis or not, I think that all people in the working world and otherwise should be able to say, hey, this is the environment where I thrive. This is the communication style where I thrive with my manager, right? I need direct communication. I need softer communication. Jessica, I need you to send me an email beforehand and tell me what we're going to talk about so I can mentally process that so that we can have like a good convo in our one-on-one. Or like, hey, I get kind of caught up in our combos and our one-on-ones. Can you send me like a recap after? 100%, absolutely. So thinking about not really how you're accommodating somebody that's working with you or for you, but how you're supporting their best performing self.
Great perspective, Jessica. And Maxine, what about you?
So for me, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am self-identifying and I have not been diagnosed. But as Rebecca had mentioned, you can, your disabilities can come into play as you get older in life, or as you continue to grow in whatever aspect of your natural life that you're doing. For me, I think that I started to realize I started having some issues with communication and understanding, and while at work, and couldn't figure out where the disconnect was. Even going back to the moral model with my son who doesn't disclose, I think a lot of that potentially is caused by me, because I thought that there was something wrong. And so, or to the fact that I also believe that he didn't need medication, right? Nothing looked like there was wrong. So why not just kind of work out the way that, you need to focus basically, as opposed to taking medication. But for me, as I've gotten older, and as a matter of fact, because of Dive In last year and being a part of a neurodiversity session last year as well, I've come to realize that I might be neurodiverse, right? I'm thinking that I didn't know what I didn't know, and therefore I didn't understand that maybe the problems and the issues and the stress that I'm having on myself is due to the fact that I've been code switching for so many years and didn't realize that it's not something that's wrong with me. It's just I have a different way of communicating and understanding. So I think if that's taken into account from the workforce, that people deal with things differently. And to Jessica's point, if you listen to someone and ask them what it is, how do they thrive and what they're doing, that you're going to get the best work out of them. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so let's do our next Slido poll. I think it might have been pulled up, and I just love this meme here. But how does invisible disabilities impact you personally? Whether you yourself, someone, you're a caregiver, you're a manager, or multiple things. Yeah, we have people coming from a lot of different perspectives. Hey, and you know us now, so everyone can check that first box. You know where to find us now on LinkedIn. Great. Thank you. Thank you all again for sharing. I mean, we're pretty well balanced between self-identifying, having a diagnosis, being a parent caregiver. Unfortunately, I can't scroll down to see what percentage are managers.
10%.
10%. Okay, great. I mean, that's awesome. That I think is what makes this conversation rich, is we're all coming from different perspectives. Let's keep moving here. All right, another kind of concept setting topic that I'm expecting a lot of you out there maybe have some good foundational knowledge on this because you're here today. But for those of you that are maybe hearing this term for the first time or haven't really thought about it, neurodiversity is just like any other aspect of our identities, our race, our gender, our hair color is just, we all have different brains and we all have different brain types, which results in different ways of thinking, learning, communicating, and socializing. And just a couple of terms, because I think one of our themes here today is just making sure we are thoughtful in the words that we use, but also getting comfortable talking about these topics. So neurotypical, there's no normal brain, right? But a neurotypical brain is one that is sort of the most common brain type or the most common brain wiring in our society. So that's sort of the dominant type. Then to contrast that, neurodivergent would be anyone whose brain functioning or brain wiring kind of falls outside of that societal norm. If you can think of a bell curve, right? We have a bunch of people clustered in the middle and lots of really great, creative, awesome brains kind of on the outsides. And then if we have a group of people that are a mix of all different brain types, that is a neurodiverse group. So how many people fall into that neurodivergent category? Well, it's now estimated about 15 to 20%. So 1 in 6 individuals are neurominorities. So not really that small of a group, right? Lots of people in this broad umbrella, which I think just really brings home why we need to talk about this and sort of how this topic kind of fits in with our overall theme of invisible disabilities. A couple of maybe common traits, everybody's different, but many neurodivergent people face similar struggles that in a world that's, essentially built for neurotypical brains. The first is executive functioning challenges. So executive functioning is sort of all the things that need to coordinate in your body to do a thing. So whether that's, your brain sending a signal to your hand or a part of your body, or, recalling information, or being able to get started on something. Those are all executive functions and might be due to the different wiring of our brain and the way our current world is constructed, a little more challenging. And I think in the workplace context, it could be perceived as someone having, being disorganized or being, consistently late to meetings or missing deadlines, when in reality, there's some really real executive functioning differences happening that might be the root cause of why on the outside it looks like someone is struggling. The next is sensory processing differences. So we all experience sensory input, right? The 5 senses: sight, sound, taste, hearing, touch. I think I got all 5. For neurodivergent people, back to kindergarten, neurodivergent folks might feel that sensory input either more acutely or less acutely. So more sensitive to light and sound, but actually might be less sensitive. And it's also related to how we feel our bodies kind of in space. So, that sense of balance or vertigo, or how we feel on the inside. So our ability to detect hunger or pain. Again, that might be more acute or less. And that impacts how a neurodivergent person may go about their day. The next box, communication needs and preferences. I think it goes without saying, just from all the comments in the chat, I think just recognizing that neurodivergent people may have either different needs or preferences in how they choose to interact, how they choose to collaborate with others. And then lastly, unfortunately, there's a really common trait of masking to look more neurotypical or look more quote unquote normal. And our panelists have already touched on that. But the kind of phenomena of masking is a really common trait. And then that leads to burnout and mental health struggles and other challenges that we'll talk about. So I want to be mindful of the time, but I do want to maybe just give our panelists a brief moment to talk about sort of this concept of neurodiversity. It's changing quickly. My son was diagnosed on the spectrum in 2015, and I just look at how much we now know about the brain that we didn't even know then. So, Jessica, maybe just briefly, your thoughts on how this topic continues to change and evolve. And you're on mute again.
I clicked it and it didn't quite get. Now we're thumbs up on good. Great.
Yep.
Great. Thanks everybody for accommodating my silliness. Where I want to focus just for a couple minutes, because I really want to give some space for Maxine and Dennis. I know I'm long-winded. As a people leader with autism, and also because of that, the way that I structure and manage my teams is through the lens of an autistic person, or through the lens of a neurodiverse approach. And so I want to point out some ways that I do that I think have been really helpful, and not because I necessarily feel that I've had people that I've managed that were clearly or have disclosed that they themselves are neurodiverse. Albeit I'll say that, I think the 8.5 billion people, or however many we have on the earth now, have 8.5 billion different brains. So we all do have diverse brains in one way or another. But ways in which, because of the way my brain works, and in my opinion, to a benefit to the organizations I work with, these are ways that I have helped my team feel so successful so that they can be their best performing selves. Because in my opinion, I should be, when I lead a team, I should be the least smart, the least talented person on the team. Like if I've done it right, I've hired all smarter people, all more capable people than I have. If I'm really smart and I've done it right. And so if that's what we believe, if we believe that the people that we're hiring are really going to excel because of who they are, then we've got to cultivate the environment that makes it best for them. So a couple of things that I've done consistently that I think have worked really well are establishing really clear roles on teams. So not just like, okay, Sally, you are, Princess Peach, and John, you are definitely Mario. Like not that sort of thing, but specifically levels of roles when there's the same task to be done sometimes. So maybe this person always does a coordinator function, an intake function. And I would define like, what does that function look like? And this next person is always the expert. So the coordinator function would know who to escalate to with questions. And then the SME would know to escalate to the owner of that. And sometimes the same person would hold all three roles on that task. The task might be reviewing a regulation. So somebody may be the coordinator, SME, and owner, all of those things on that same regulation, or there may be a couple people working on it. But it really makes it clear how they interact with each other and when it needs to come to me. So I'm very clear about those expectations. I use open-ended questions a lot. So instead of with my team saying, do you have any other questions? Do you need anything else from me? Like psychologically, we're quick to say no to those questions. So instead, to make sure I'm kind of cultivating a really authentic environment so that they can answer, I'll say, what else do you need to be successful? What else can I do to support you? When would be helpful for me to check in? Would it be helpful when I check in at this time? Would you like me to go? Would it be helpful if I went over this again with you? Would you like to meet again on this? And they can say no, and that's great. But that way you're getting their most authentic response and you know that you're supporting them best. And then the very last one I want to point out is just asking them, what format is best for you? Hey, we're going to meet in a one-on-one. Is it helpful if I send like an agenda ahead of time, or you're not really going to read it? Or do you like me to recap after? Are you more of a visual person, an auditory person? Like, is this helpful? You like this approach? And just giving them a couple of things to pick from. I know I'd seen some questions in some of the chats around how do you make an environment like that more inclusive for lots of people if you don't know, or you don't know who has what, and I think it's around the idea of just being inclusive for everyone's best performing self.
Absolutely. So Dennis, from a parent caregiver perspective, what about you?
Yeah, I think the important thing to know about neurodiversity, again, is it's like we may all speak the same language, but you're not sharing the same understanding, right? And where I've seen this with is between myself and my wife and my son. That sometimes we butt heads, not because we don't intend to do things. Really quickly, my wife will say, take out the garbage, and I will take out the garbage, right? But but then I won't put the new garbage bag in and then the liner back into the garbage can, right? But I did what I was asked, right? And so that causes a bit of a disconnect because, again, I completed the task as I understood it, not how she understood. So again, our understandings were just at a different level, right? So if you know that there's a disconnect in that understanding, it can help to try to make sure you explain things a different way so you're more level setting, right? And that's just a quick example of how it's caused a lot of, conflict in relationships in my family, and hopefully by learning to this misunderstanding that that's all it is. It's not someone. I'm not trying to upset her by not putting and finishing that whole garbage routine, or my son's not doing everything that my wife asked. She can't ask him to do 5 things. He'll be lucky if he does one of them. So, Maxine, do you want to add to that?
I do, because that definitely resonates with me, especially with my son. Not, like I said, just coming to kind of understand how this all works. I look at my past and how I kind of raised my son, and I think of the disservice that I may have caused him because I didn't have a good understanding. But I think that's because as of the world, we're just kind of getting into really truly understanding how neurodiverse brains work. So I don't try to blame myself as much, but I'm trying to be very cognizant. And with regards to, I know there was a question with regards to code switching and masking. With me, I have specific example where in a previous position that I had held, I have always been a high performing contributor. And in this one position, I couldn't understand why I wasn't getting it. Like, I just felt like I was either something was wrong. Things were just not connecting. And with all my other managers, everything seemed to flow pretty well. But I think at that point in time, like I said, I had been code switching all my life. So kind of just worked the way that everybody expected me to work, did the things that they expected me to do. And then when I went into this new area, they wanted things differently. And so now it's really confusing my brain, and I'm getting stressed out because I'm trying to adhere to the things they want me to, but it's not fitting in with the way that I'm used to working. My communication style doesn't work. The way I learn doesn't work. So it all became very difficult, which is where I started kind of noticing that there was something else is underlying.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love that. Thank you all for your perspectives. I might actually add, while we jump to our next polling question, to fill a little dead space here, I might actually add a personal anecdote just hearing you all talk. So I have audio processing challenges as sort of part of and you can, yep, perfect. So while I'm chattering on here, you can feel free to kind of participate in our word cloud with any invisible disabilities that you identify with. So I have audio processing challenges, and one thing, so my husband always had commented, and I've known him a long time, that I talk really loudly, and I talk really loudly when I'm getting upset or animated, and I can't tell that I'm talking loudly. And actually, fairly recently, it dawned on me that I raise the volume of my voice when I'm more metaphorically feeling like I'm not being heard. So if I feel like my point isn't getting across, or I'm not being heard in a conversation, I elevate the volume of my voice. I can't hear it. I can't tell I'm doing that, but that's sort of just something that's happening. And so my husband's always saying, stop yelling, or why are you talking so loudly? And that drove me crazy. But now that we've had this collective realization, it's been really, I think it's really improved our interactions, and we can just identify that's happening. So that's my little personal anecdote on sensory and executive functioning. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, lots of folks out there with ADHD, anxiety, dyslexia, depression. But if you see how many different words, it really speaks to how big of a category this is, and how many different ways we all may have invisible disabilities that our coworkers may not be aware of. So thank you so much for sharing. Let's keep moving along here. And I think the next slide might actually help with some of the questions in the chat, and I just would love the conversation here too. I'm a math person, and I love a good Venn diagram, so I get the question a lot: is neurodiversity a disability? Is it a mental health condition? How are these things all related? So let me make a couple of points here, and hopefully this can help you all in kind of just thinking and talking about all three of these different topics with, in your workplaces. So one thing to keep in mind is, as we've been talking about today, not all neurodivergent people consider themselves to be disabled. However, many may qualify for legal protections under, here in the US, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is sort of the gatekeeper to access accommodations in a legal sense in the workplace. So that's really challenging, right? Because there might be people that have needs that are not eligible for legal protections under the ADA. You may have people who are eligible but may not know it. And the process itself can be really difficult to navigate. So let's kind of think about that. Let's put a pin in that one. Another thing, many neurodivergent people experience mental health comorbidities such as depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and that can be the result of all the masking and code switching that is happening every day, all day. And then when we think about mental health conditions, there are certain neurocognitive conditions like autism spectrum disorder, and I hate the disorder part, but that's just the official name for it, and ADHD, same thing. Those are listed as disorders in the kind of psychologist's guidebook, which is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Model of Mental Disorders. Those criteria are continually being updated for autism, most recently in 2013. But again, sort of in that medical model view, there are certain things that need to be checked off to get that medical diagnosis. And then that can mean insurance coverage or, special education services. But not everybody may qualify for those. So that's important to keep in mind. And then kind of bringing that all together around this idea of the neurodiversity movement, really promoting the viewpoint that neurodivergence is a naturally occurring human variation. So as we're trying to help people with hidden disabilities, with neurodivergence, navigate their day, we really need to be thinking about these different gatekeepers, these different definitions that exist, whether it's the ADA from a accommodations policy perspective, medical diagnosis for insurance or other benefits, and how do we remove some of those barriers? We can't change necessarily the ADA, nor should we. There's good reason we have it, but how do we make the process easier? How do we make sure more people can be part of this Venn diagram? It doesn't matter which part of the circle you're on. We just want to make sure everyone is getting the support that they need. And so let's then now, I'm going to, sorry, just in the interest of time, maybe skip our panel, but ask you all, how do you identify? And we had some really great discussion amongst our prep group on this very topic. A lot of debate, healthy, good debate. Is neurodiversity a disability? Is it a mental health condition? Is it not sure? None of the above, all of the above. And there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah, so I think there is a pretty good consensus around neurodiversity as a disability, neurodiversity as a mental health condition. Yeah, and I think it can really just depend on the situation or the circumstance. I think there's a need for some of these different frameworks. But hopefully this helps you all just think about and some things to take back with you. We want to spend a minute talking about the words we use. We've been deliberately walking through a progression of different terminology, but I think there's a recognition that this is a really difficult topic to talk about because people feel uncomfortable. They don't know the right words to use. So I'm going to walk through two different types of language, person first and identity first. Person first language is sort of this implied, you put the person first, and then with having a disability or condition, it's really implying that their disability or condition is only just one part of who they are. And there's a lot of people with disabilities who prefer that person first view. It's almost like sliding a little bit over to that medical model where, I may have a condition or I may have, I think obesity is another example of a space where, in the past we may have thought obesity is, a deliberate behavior or an action, someone's not exercising enough, not eating enough. We now know that it's a medical condition. So kind of sliding over from obese person to person with obesity is the preference for that community. On the other side, we have identity first language, and that's sort of implying that the disability or the condition is not something that can be separated from the person. So an autistic person rather than a person with autism. And to me, and I would love to hear your all thoughts, but just kind of that slides back over to the social model of disability, where it's just an inherent part of our identity, not good, not bad. The important thing to know, though, is preferences vary. There might be communities of people that prefer one over the other. It's okay to ask. It's okay to ask someone what their preferences are. And then maybe just a couple of good words of rules of thumb. So even if we disagree about person first or identity first, what can we agree on? One, disability is not a bad or dirty word. We can say disability. Let's avoid euphemisms like differently abled or handy capable. It's okay to say disability. Okay, that's the first one. Be aware of language that reinforces stigma and stereotypes. Instead of mental illness or committed suicide, we can say mental health challenge or died by suicide. Keep a positive, or at a minimum, a neutral tone. Avoid phrases like suffers from epilepsy, suffers from hearing loss. Those people are probably not suffering. They're probably living their best lives. We can say lives with instead. And then lastly, don't make assumptions about abilities. I think it's really common in our vernacular to say things like high functioning autism to signal someone's functioning ability. What happens is, though, that is through the eyes of the observer. And our whole discussion today is about the fact that invisible disabilities are not visible to the observer. So even though someone may look high functioning or low functioning to you, that doesn't mean that they have or do not have certain abilities. So I think removing that sort of high functioning label from our everyday language will really help conversations like this. And let's keep moving. I know we're just about out of time here. Just to leave you all with maybe some thoughts around what do we do? How can we make the workplace better? And I absolutely love this visual and this idea of the curb cut effect. So the curb cut effect is this phenomena where we do things intended to support or help people with disabilities, so disability-friendly features, but they benefit everybody. And the close cousin of the curb cut effect is universal design, where we are thinking about the design of programs or policies that everyone can use. So in this example here with the literal curb cut, it was designed for the person in the wheelchair, but someone who's pushing heavy boxes or riding a bike or pushing a baby stroller, everyone benefits from having that curb cut. And we've included here some ways that we can take that curb cut perspective into the workplace, whether it's technology, so making closed captioning available for every meeting. Think about our accessibility features, text-to-speech applications. Don't make someone request it, just make it available. Also physical space, so having hands-free entries and doors. I think we'd all like to have that, right? Think about germs. Audible crosswalk reminders to help someone with hearing loss. Signage that's really clear. Communication, so structured communications, Jessica talked a lot about sort of providing that clear expectation up front before a meeting. Flexible work arrangements. There's lots of different ways, and maybe we can kind of, and I know we're a little bit running out of time here, but if anyone in the audience for our last word cloud, are there any curb cut effects that you're using in your workplace, or that you have an idea of what could make your workplace better? I think we can all maybe take some quick notes here on things that we can do to make the workplace just more accessible for everybody. And really important here is removing the default, removing the need to request, just make it available for everybody. And I think there was some questions about fairness in the chat and this perception, well, what if someone says it's unfair? We just need to let go of that mentality when we're talking about accessibility. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, you're all here today, but let's think about how can we make things easier, more seamless, more accessible for all of our colleagues, regardless of what their challenges are.
I love some of these ones that are coming in too. I'll be screenshotting this for myself.
I know, flexible work arrangements. I know,
grab a copy of it.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's like the ADA and accommodations butts heads a little bit, where there's this definition of reasonable accommodation, and it's specific to job function. We shouldn't just be doing things so we don't get sued. We should be doing things because it just makes the workplace better, and all the reasons that Jessica shared in the beginning. And so maybe we can wrap up today. I know we are just about out of time, but just you're here today, so thank you so much for engaging in our conversation. And some things to take away with you, and especially for those putting in the chat, well, what if my workplace isn't very inclusive or accommodating? What do I do? So first, listen and learn. So you're here today, and thank you for listening to our perspectives, but do that in your community and listen to people from diverse voices and viewpoints. Engage in programming. So does your employer offer an employee resource group? If it doesn't, hey, maybe you grab a couple of friends or other people that you've met with within your affinity group and create one. Find those resources at your company. And then lastly, walk the talk. It's like brushing our teeth. We have to do this and think about it every day. This idea of belonging and inclusion in the workplace, we need to be the role models. So I rushed through that. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. You're amazing. Thank you for sharing. We are recording the session, so I think if anyone wants to listen again, you're welcome to. And then the other thing is you can find any of us on LinkedIn. So maybe, I know we're over time, but can I ask each of our panelists if you'd like to add maybe one final thought or a thank you? I'll give you one last opportunity to speak.
I'll start and I'll be quick. I just want to say thank you for, I've seen in the chat some folks have been really vulnerable about talking about their own experiences. So thank you for sharing all of that. And with the cultural change, so with this call to action, it says, thanks for being here, but now take it back, go teach others and help others along the way, because the problem isn't that you don't know what to do. The problem is that other people may not know what to do. So spearhead the way and kind of normalize making these things available for all people. So thanks so much. Check any of us out on LinkedIn. I will post the accommodations that I ask for myself for ADHD and autism. I've heard a lot of people ask, like, well, what do I ask for those things? I'm going to post it on LinkedIn just as an example. So I'll do that. But over to you guys, Dennis and Maxine.
I'm just going to say very quickly, thank you to everyone who attended for listening to our perspectives, but also thank you, Diven, for making this topic so aware, making it more for people to see more actively, because without you, it would have connected for me and I would have had I'd just be struggling. So I thank Diven. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here. Really quickly, for the neurodivergent people out there, just remember you're not alone, right? I didn't really find out until I was 50 that I was neurodivergent, and it brought so many other things to light, and how you're treated, you have all this potential, but you're not realizing it until they just think you're lazy and just, need to focus, right? It can be a form of abuse. And once you realize what it is very empowering. It's very freeing. So learning more about it. And I think that's where, if other people have asked the question of how we can support people, it's just understanding that we're a little different. We see things a little different. We might be a little more literal. We're a little odd in some way, shape, or form, right? But that's kind of what makes us great. So
thanks everyone.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Rebecca.
Thank
You're
you.
the best.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca.
Bye.